I woke up to a pounding headache and a strange smell drifting through the small rustic room I found myself in. The scent of freshly baked pies, something homemade and comforting, wafted in from the kitchen. But the surroundings were anything but familiar. The walls were made of rough-hewn timber, the windows small and framed with peeling paint, and an old, faded portrait hung crookedly in the corner. I was definitely not in my penthouse apartment in London anymore. Worse still, the morning chorus wasn't my usual city hum. It was the unmistakable crow of a rooster. Roosters did not belong in my life. I was used to the polished buzz of the city, the soft hum of machines, not farmyard alarms. The voice that woke me was bright and teasing, with a hint of mischief that immediately made me wary. "Eyes open, love, you're not asleep anymore," it said. I blinked, trying to focus, and saw a young woman standing by the bed. She was hard to place. Her face was youthful, a little naive, with rosy cheeks and sparkling eyes that seemed to hold both innocence and a spark of cunning. Her clothes, however, told a different story. A simple floral dress that looked decades out of fashion, paired with thick woolen socks and worn leather boots. Her hair was braided into 2 plaits, framing her face with an almost childlike charm. Yet, her figure was undeniably curvy, and the way she carried herself suggested she wasn't quite as simple as her attire implied. The woman introduced herself as Mary, though she seemed to reconsider immediately, as if the name tasted funny on her tongue. She plopped down on a nearby chair and watched me with a familiarity that unsettled me. It was as if we were old friends or perhaps more, and I was the one confused about how we ended up in this odd situation. I glanced around, trying to piece together how I went from a wild night in a London club to waking up in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. My head was still spinning from the previous evening's events. Paul's stag do, or rather, his disastrous attempt at one. I had no memory of how I got here, and the fact that the first thing to greet me was a rooster's crow was a cruel joke. Mary handed me a jug of water, placing it gently on the bedside table. The water felt like liquid gold on my parched throat, and for a moment every headache and confusion melted away. Mary's voice cut through my haze again. "Don't gulp it all down, or you'll regret it later," she warned, a teasing smile tugging at her lips. I tried to ask her where I was, how I'd gotten here, and most importantly, who she was, but my mouth felt dry and my thoughts jumbled. She chuckled softly, shaking her head as if I were a troublesome child. "You were quite the character last night," she said, eyes sparkling with amusement. "You swore undying love to me, promised marriage, and now you don't even remember my name." Her tone was playful but laced with something deeper. Maybe disappointment or disbelief. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. There was no way I was going to marry this girl, but I couldn't deny her charm or the strange comfort of her presence. I tried to explain my situation, my questions tumbling out. She listened patiently, occasionally teasing me about my state and the fact that I had apparently spent the night snoring so loudly she barely got any sleep. She even joked about being kept awake by my desert-dry mouth and insisted I drink more water. Eventually, I reached for my phone to call Paul, my best mate and the reason for this chaos. Mary raised an eyebrow and told me to ask my friends to bring a goat. I almost choked on my water. A goat? What on earth was going on? I was afraid to ask for more details, but curiosity got the better of me. Paul's voice was like a punch in the face through the phone, loud, brash, and full of the kind of humor only a lifelong friend could muster. He explained that no one had dumped me in the countryside. On the contrary, they had been trying to get me home, but I was insistent on staying. There was something about a goat, a scuffle, and a local girl who apparently couldn't resist my drunken charms. And then the groom himself had shown up, wanting some homemade moonshine, and somehow I ended up promising to marry Mary. Listening to Paul, I felt a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. How had I managed to turn a stag do into a countryside farce involving a goat and a fake engagement? The more I learned, the less I wanted to admit what a complete mess I'd made of things. But Mary, bless her, seemed to take it all in stride. She laughed at my confusion and teased me about my wild promises. She even scolded me like a wife would, which was both amusing and terrifying. Paul promised to call his friends to sort out the mess and bring a new goat to replace the one I apparently destroyed. Mary just shrugged, clearly used to this kind of rural chaos. I could almost hear the village gossip already. After the call ended, Mary invited me to the kitchen where a hearty breakfast awaited. Pies, pancakes, and jam made from fruits I couldn't identify but tasted heavenly. The contrast between the rustic food and my high society palate was stark, but I found myself devouring it with surprising enthusiasm. Mary proudly declared that everything was homemade, natural and free from the chemicals of the city. I had to admit I'd never tasted anything quite like it. Stepping outside afterwards, I nearly tripped over myself at the sight of my car. The bonnet was a crumpled mess, the kind of damage that told stories of reckless speed and worse judgment. Mary gave me a dry look and said something about her Zoria goat being irreplaceable, unlike my precious car that I promised to come back the next evening. But deep down I knew this little adventure was far from over. Returning home was no relief either. My father was furious, more than usual, and I could see the disappointment etched into every line of his face. He'd expected me to have settled down by now, to be a man worthy of our family name and fortune. Instead, here I was waking up in a farmhouse involved in some ridiculous fake engagement with a country girl, and nursing a hangover that threatened to split my skull. The confrontation was brutal. My father's anger was a storm, his words sharp and relentless. He spoke of legacy, responsibility, and the shame I was bringing upon our name. I tried to explain, but he wasn't interested in excuses. The worst part was the silence that followed his tirade, the cold, heavy pause that felt like a verdict later. Trying to make sense of everything, I met up with Paul at a quiet restaurant. The stag do was behind us, and the wedding we were supposed to celebrate was looming. We joked about my father's fury, about goats, and about the absurdity of it all. Paul suggested marriage as the only way to prove I was serious, and despite myself, I entertained the idea. After all, what harm could a sham wedding do? Back in the village, Mary waited patiently, visiting her friend for tea every evening and talking about me like I was some distant prince who'd surely return. Her optimism was infectious, and part of me felt guilty for not living up to her expectations. But I wasn't ready to believe in the fairy tale she spun, no matter how sweet her smiles or how tempting the warmth of her presence. Mary and her friend Darla had their own complicated stories. Darla with her young son and broken dreams, Mary with her stubborn pride and hope for a better life. They teased each other mercilessly, but beneath the banter was a sisterhood forged in hardship and dreams. Days passed, and I found myself drawn back to the village, to Mary, to the strange rustic world I'd tried to leave behind. I bought her a new goat, a gesture that felt like a peace offering and a step toward something neither of us fully understood. We shared moments that blurred the lines between pretense and something genuine. Her laughter over pancakes, the way her eyes sparkled when she thought no one was watching, the shy tilt of her head when I looked at her too long. She wasn't the polished, perfect woman I was used to, but she was real, and that terrified me as our fake engagement unfolded. So did the tangled web of family secrets, personal demons, and the harsh realities of a life I'd never imagined living. My father's illness worsened, casting a shadow over everything, while Mary's strength and vulnerabilities became impossible to ignore. I was caught between two worlds, the glittering, ruthless city life I'd always known and the raw, honest simplicity of the countryside, and the woman who'd claimed a piece of my heart without even trying. And just when I thought I was beginning to understand what it meant to care, to fight, and to hope, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to shatter the fragile peace we'd built and force me to choose between who I was and who I wanted to become. But that storm was still waiting for me down the road. For now, I sat back in that worn wooden chair, sipping tea, watching Mary laugh as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills, and wondered if I was ready to face what came next. The days that followed felt like a slow, precarious dance on a tightrope stretched between two very different worlds. Each morning, I woke up to the unfamiliar sound of birdsong instead of the city's distant sirens, and each night, the stars above this tiny village seemed to shine just a little too brightly, reminding me how far I'd fallen from my usual orbit. Mary had become a constant presence in my life, a strange, beautiful paradox wrapped in faded floral dresses and the scent of wildflowers, with eyes that held a depth I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a country girl. She was the kind of woman who could make a simple kitchen feel like a palace. The way she moved, the soft sway of her hips as she bustled about, the gentle curve of her neck when she bent to pour tea, all of it stirred something in me I wasn't ready to name. Her laughter, unpolished and genuine, echoed in the small rooms, filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. I tried to keep my distance, remind myself this was all a charade, a contract, a means to an end. But the truth was, Mary was slipping past my carefully drawn boundaries like sunlight through the cracks of a shuttered window. One afternoon, I found her in the garden, kneeling by a patch of wild herbs and flowers, her fingers deftly pulling weeds and tenderly tending to the soil. She wore a simple white blouse, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and a skirt that fluttered just above her ankles, revealing boots scuffed from endless days of work. Her hair had escaped its usual plaits, tumbling loosely down her back in a cascade of chestnut waves that caught the light like spun silk. There was a quiet strength in her that belied her rustic appearance, and I caught myself watching her longer than polite, or perhaps even wise. I cleared my throat, breaking the spell, and she looked up, flashing that mischievous smile that seemed to say, "Caught you staring." Her cheeks flushed a delicate pink, and I was suddenly very aware of the heat radiating from her. The subtle fragrance of lavender and earth that clung to her skin. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Well, I talked mostly, trying to fill the silence with explanations about my life, my family, and the mess I'd made of things. Mary listened, occasionally interjecting with a sharp remark or a teasing jab that kept the mood light. Yet beneath the banter I sensed a quiet sorrow, a layer of resilience shaped by hardship and unspoken dreams. The truth was, Mary's life had been far from easy. Her family had roots in this land, but poverty and circumstance had hardened her heart in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Yet there was a flicker of something more, hope perhaps, or the stubborn refusal to be defined by her surroundings. That evening, as we sat by the fire in her modest living room, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, Mary reached out and took my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. I felt the walls I'd built around myself begin to crumble, brick by brick. But reality soon intruded, as it always did. The following morning brought a harsh reminder of the life I was trying to escape. My father's condition had worsened, and the hospital called with news that left a heavy weight settling over my chest. The disease was advancing faster than anyone had hoped, and time was slipping through our fingers like sand. I returned to London, the city's cold steel and glass a stark contrast to the warmth I'd found in Mary's company. My father's anger had mellowed into a quiet desperation, and his disappointment was tempered by the fragile hope that my marriage, real or not, might anchor me. Mary stayed behind in the village, tending to her farm and waiting for the day I'd return. I tried to call her as often as I could, but the distance stretched between us like a widening chasm. Every time I heard her voice on the phone, I was reminded of what I was risking, my freedom, my future, and perhaps even my heart. The wedding itself was a whirlwind, a lavish affair organized hastily to satisfy my father's wishes and silence the gossip. Mary was transformed for the occasion. Her simple dress replaced with a gown of delicate lace that hugged her curves and fell in soft waves around her feet. Her hair was swept up in a loose chignon, a few tendrils framing her face, and her makeup was subtle, enhancing the natural beauty I'd come to cherish. As we stood before the registrar, exchanging vows that felt both hollow and profound, I caught Mary's eye and saw a mixture of hope, fear, and something that resembled love. It terrified me and thrilled me all at once. Back at my father's estate, Mary navigated the unfamiliar world of high society with surprising grace. She smiled through awkward introductions, politely accepted compliments that sounded more like veiled insults, and even managed to charm my mother, who had flown in from Italy for the occasion. But beneath the polished surface, tension simmered. My father's health continued to decline, and the shadow of his illness loomed over every conversation, every meal, every stolen glance between Mary and me. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, my father summoned me to his bedside. His voice was weak but resolute as he spoke of legacy, responsibility, and the future he hoped I would build, not just for myself, but for the family name. Mary stood quietly in the corner, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight and something deeper, perhaps understanding, perhaps sorrow. After he fell asleep, I found myself alone with her, the weight of the moment pressing down on us both. Her fingers brushed against mine, tentative but sure, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this charade could become something real. But life has a way of unraveling the most carefully woven plans. A phone call shattered the fragile peace we'd found. The doctor's voice was grave as he delivered news that sent a chill down my spine. Mary was pregnant. The timing, the circumstances, the uncertainty. It was all too much to process. Mary's face was a mixture of fear and defiance when I told her. She wasn't the simple girl I'd met in that farmhouse. She was a woman who knew how to fight for what she wanted. "I'm carrying your child," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging behind her eyes. And there's no going back. I was stunned. The reality of fatherhood, responsibility, and the life I'd been running from crashed over me like a tidal wave. The future suddenly seemed both terrifying and inevitable as we faced this new chapter together. I realized that the village, the farmhouse, and the woman who'd turned my world upside down had become my home in ways I never imagined possible. And yet, in the quiet moments between the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The past had a way of creeping back, secrets waiting to be uncovered, and choices demanding to be made. For now, I held Mary's hand, looked into her determined eyes, and braced myself for whatever came next, knowing that the road ahead would test us both in ways we never expected. The days that followed the news seemed to blur into a surreal montage of whispered conversations, cautious glances, and a mounting tension that neither Mary nor I could fully escape. Her pregnancy was no secret now, yet the reality of it hung between us like a fragile glass ornament, beautiful but perilously close to shattering at the slightest misstep. The village had begun to buzz with speculation, but Mary met every whispered word with a steady calm that only deepened my admiration. And my unease. Our morning started early in that modest cottage she called home, the light filtering softly through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floorboards. Mary would often be already up, tending to her little garden or preparing a simple breakfast, fresh bread still warm from the oven, honey from the village beekeeper, and steaming cups of tea that tasted like comfort itself. Her hands, rough from work yet gentle in their movements, moved with a grace that belied the hardship she'd endured. She dressed simply but with an effortless charm that made even the faded floral dresses she favored seem like couture. Her hair, usually tied back in those familiar braids, now often fell loose over her shoulders, soft waves framing her face and highlighting the faint flush of pregnancy. I caught myself stealing glances more often than I cared to admit, my heart tightening at the sight of her vulnerability and strength intertwined. Despite the growing closeness between us, the shadow of my father's illness loomed relentlessly. The estate felt colder than ever, its grand halls echoing with silence and memories I wasn't ready to face. Mary's presence was a balm, but the weight of my responsibilities, and the expectations pressing down from every corner of my life, made it hard to fully embrace the happiness that flickered between us. One afternoon, as a stubborn drizzle blurred the edges of the countryside beyond the window, Mary and I sat side by side on the worn sofa, the air thick with unspoken fears and tentative hopes. She reached out, her fingers curling around mine with a steady reassurance that felt like an anchor. I'm scared, she admitted softly, voice barely above a whisper. Not just about the baby but everything. This life we're stepping into. It's not what I imagined. I squeezed her hand, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. Neither did I confessed. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're meant to build something new. Something real. Her eyes met mine, shimmering with unshed tears and a fierce determination that made my chest ache. I want to believe that. I really do. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations and adjustments. Mary's simple cottage began to fill with small touches of the life we were trying to create. Soft blankets hand-stitched by the village women, a crib fashioned from polished oak, and shelves lined with books and toys that seemed almost too precious for such a humble setting. I found myself drawn deeper into this world, trading the sleek lines of my city life for the rough-hewn beauty of the countryside. Each evening, after tending to my father's affairs, I would return to Mary's side, where laughter and warmth awaited me. The scent of fresh bread, the crackling of the fireplace, and the quiet strength in Mary's gaze offered a refuge I hadn't known I needed. Yet, beneath the surface, the complexities of our situation simmered. My father's illness continued its relentless march, and the question of inheritance, the legacy I was supposed to claim, hung over us like a specter. Mary's presence, once a source of comfort, had become a point of contention, stirring old resentments and new suspicions among those who saw her as an outsider, a complication to be managed or dismissed. One evening, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, I received an urgent call from the hospital. My father's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The weight of impending loss settled heavily on my shoulders as I rushed to his side, Mary's hand in mine a steadying presence amid the storm. I in the sterile hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic, my father looked at me with eyes clouded by pain but clear in their final resolve. His voice was weak but unwavering as he spoke of forgiveness, hope, and the future he wished for me. I want you to be happy, he whispered, with whoever stands by your side. Don't let my mistakes chain you. Mary stood quietly nearby, her presence a testament to that promise. In that moment I realized that the life we were building, fragile and uncertain, was worth fighting for. The days that followed were a blur of grief and reflection. My father passed away peacefully, leaving behind a legacy both burdensome and inspiring. The estate felt emptier without him, but Mary and I found solace in each other, our bond deepening as we navigated the complexities of loss and hoped. As the seasons changed, so did our lives. The baby grew inside Mary, a symbol of new beginnings and the unpredictable beauty of love forged in adversity. We faced challenges, whispers of scandal, doubts from those who questioned our union, and the ever-present tension between our worlds, but through it all we held on to each other. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Mary and I stood on the porch of our home, watching the village lights flicker to life. The future was uncertain, filled with unknowns and promises yet to be fulfilled. But as she leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Yet, beneath the calm, a question lingered. A secret whispered on the wind, a shadow lurking just beyond the warmth of our newfound life. Something from the past, unresolved and waiting, threatened to unravel everything we'd fought for. And I couldn't help but wonder, was the life we were building truly ours, or was it just the calm before a storm yet to come? The first light of dawn crept hesitantly through the delicate lace curtains, casting a pale glow over the room where Mary lay asleep, her breath soft and even, the faint swell of her belly a quiet promise of the life growing within. I watched her for a moment, the peacefulness in her face stirring a tenderness I hadn't expected to feel so deeply. This woman, with her worn clothes and simple manners, had become the center of my restless world. My anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Dressing quietly, I slipped out of the cottage and stepped into the cool morning air. The village was still wrapped in the hush of early hours, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint aroma of wood smoke from chimneys. I felt a strange sense of calm, but beneath it, a knot of unease tightened in my gut. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, but there were shadows lurking, whispers in the village, messages left unspoken, and a growing sense that our fragile happiness was not immune to the storms gathering on the horizon. That on my way to the market town a few miles down the lane, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by one person, but by the weight of unseen eyes, judging, waiting. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional shopkeeper setting out their wares, and I tried to focus on the mundane tasks ahead, picking up supplies, sending messages to my solicitor, tying up loose ends from my father's affairs. But my mind kept drifting back to Mary, to the life we were trying to build, and to the secrets I sensed she was keeping beneath her quiet smiles. Back at the cottage, Mary was tending to the small vegetable patch when I returned. She looked up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her eyes lighting up with a warmth that made my chest ache. As I approached, she offered me a shy smile, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. But the fragile bubble burst sooner than I'd hoped. A knock at the door startled us both, and when I opened it, a tall, stern-faced man stood on the threshold. His eyes were sharp, carrying the weight of authority and an unspoken warning. He introduced himself as a representative from a distant law firm, bearing documents that unsettled me instantly, letters regarding the estate, claims from unknown parties contesting my inheritance, and whispers of debts and obligations I had never been made aware of. Mary's hand found mine, fingers trembling slightly, and I realized that this was the beginning of a new battle, one that threatened not just my family's legacy but the fragile peace we had carved out together. Days turned into nights, filled with tense meetings, legal wrangling, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. The city's cold bureaucracy clashed violently with the warmth of the countryside, and I found myself caught between two worlds once again. Mary stood steadfast by my side, her presence a constant source of strength amid the chaos, but I could see the strain it was placing on her. Her laughter less frequent, her eyes shadowed with worry. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Mary confided in me a secret she had kept hidden, one that explained much of the tension simmering beneath the surface. She spoke of a past marked by hardship and betrayal, of debts owed not just in money but in loyalty and pain. The revelation hit me like a thunderclap, reshaping everything I thought I knew about her and the life we were building. Despite the turmoil, our bond deepened. We learned to navigate the treacherous waters together, finding solace in stolen moments, A touch, a shared glance, the quiet comfort of presence. Mary's strength became my shield, and I vowed to protect her and our unborn child from the shadows threatening to engulf us. As the baby's arrival drew near, the stakes grew higher. The estate's troubles escalated, and old enemies emerged from the shadows, their intentions dark and unforgiving. I realized that to safeguard our future, I would have to confront not only external threats but the demons of my own past. One night, as the wind howled through the trees and the house settled into uneasy silence, I found myself alone in the study, sifting through letters and documents that painted a picture of deceit and betrayal reaching far beyond what I had imagined. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and I understood that the true battle was only beginning. Returning to Mary's side, I felt the weight of responsibility settle over me like a cloak. Her hand in mine was warm and steady, a beacon in the gathering storm. Together we faced the unknown, bound by love, hope, and the unshakable belief that no matter the darkness ahead, we would endure. But as the first cries of our child filled the quiet night, a shadow moved unseen, whispered words carried on the wind, a secret promise that the past would not rest quietly, and that the choices we made would echo far into the future. And so, with our new life beginning, the question remained: how long before the past came calling again? The first cries of our child echoed through the cottage, a tiny fragile sound that filled the room with a warmth I hadn't known was possible. Holding that small bundle in my arms, wrapped in a soft blanket Mary had sewn herself, I felt a surge of emotions: joy, fear, hope, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This little life was now woven into the tangled fabric of ours, a beacon of light amid the shadows that still clung to our doorstep. Mary sat beside me, exhaustion etched deep into her features, but her eyes shone with a fierce pride that made my heart ache. She reached out, fingers trembling slightly as she brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. In that moment, the weight of everything, the battles, the secrets, the losses, seemed to lift, if only for a fleeting breath. But peace was a rare visitor in our lives. Almost as soon as the midwife left, the air grew heavy with unease. The village, once a place of quiet comfort, buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Old debts and new threats pressed in from every side, and the legal troubles surrounding the estate showed no sign of abating. It was as if the very earth beneath us was shifting, threatening to swallow everything we'd fought for. One evening, as a chill wind rattled the windows and rain pattered against the roof, a visitor arrived, an enigmatic figure cloaked in shadows, bearing a message that sent a shiver down my spine. The past, it seemed, was not content to stay buried. It had come calling, demanding to be reckoned with. Mary and I held each other close that night, the baby's soft breathing a steady rhythm against the storm's howl. We knew the road ahead would be treacherous, filled with choices that could either bind us together or tear us apart. Yet, beneath the fear, a fierce determination burned, an unspoken vow to protect our family, no matter the cost. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, I understood that our story was far from over. The future held mysteries yet to unfold, challenges yet to be faced, and truths that would test the very core of who we were. But for now, in the quiet light of morning, I allowed myself a moment of hope, a fragile, precious thing, knowing that whatever storms awaited, we would face them together. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the rolling hills and whispering trees, a secret waited to be uncovered, a shadow from the past that threatened to shatter the fragile peace we'd found. The question was not if, but when.